The most powerful message is the one you don't send because silence carries a weight that words can never hold. It's the echo of everything you wanted to say but chose not to. It's the space that forces someone to face themselves when there's no longer a conversation to hide behind. When you stop texting, when you stop reaching out to explain, defend, or fix things, you shift the entire dynamic. Because avoidants are not afraid of losing you. They're afraid of confrontation. They're afraid of intimacy. They're afraid of being seen. But when your silence replaces your emotion, when you stop trying to be understood and simply withdraw your energy, that's when they feel your presence the most. Not because you're there, but because you're gone. Your absence becomes louder than your messages ever were. And in that quiet, they start to miss what they took for granted. Silence is not the same as indifference. It's not about punishing someone. It's about reclaiming your power. It's the point where you stop playing the emotional tug of war and choose peace instead. And that peace doesn't go unnoticed. Because when you stop sending that, "Are you okay?" a text, when you stop checking if they've seen your message, when you stop overthinking what to say next, they start noticing the stillness, the sudden calm that used to be filled with your attention. And it confuses them. Because you've always been the one who kept the connection alive. And now that you've stopped, they're forced to feel the gap. Avoidants crave distance until they feel it. And they crave control until they lose it. And your silence gives them both at once. It gives them space but takes away power. And that contradiction pulls at their mind more than any text ever could. You see, words give them something to react to. Silence gives them nothing. And that nothing is terrifying. Because when you're silent, they can't predict what you're thinking. They can't measure how much you care. They can't feel in control anymore. They start wondering, did they move on? Did they stop caring? Are they really done this time? And that uncertainty becomes unbearable. Because avoidants want to feel wanted without having to give. But your silence removes that comfort. It shows them what it feels like when your energy is no longer available on demand. They start replaying old conversations, checking if they missed something, wondering if you've met someone else. And all of this happens without you doing a single thing. That's the beauty of silence. It turns their avoidance into obsession, their pride into panic, because silence makes them face the one thing they run from: loss. When you stop sending messages, you're not just withholding communication. You're shifting energy. You're saying, "I no longer need you to validate my feelings." You're saying, "I'm done performing for connection." And that energy is magnetic because people feel it even from a distance. They feel when your heart no longer reaches for them. They feel when your attention detaches. They feel when your peace becomes stronger than your longing. And that's when they start missing you. Because missing someone doesn't come from seeing their texts. It comes from not seeing them anymore. It's the absence that awakens awareness. It's the silence that creates curiosity. It's the emotional withdrawal that makes them realize what your presence truly meant. And suddenly, the person who wanted space begins to crave your closeness again. Because silence forces them to experience the void they created. There's a difference between silence that's manipulative and silence that's self-respecting. The first tries to provoke, the second tries to heal, and what you're doing is healing. You're not withholding words to play games. You're protecting your peace to rebuild your power. Because constant communication doesn't create connection, it creates dependency. And you finally learned that you don't have to explain your worth through messages. You don't have to prove your love by overreaching. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Not because you stopped caring, but because you've learned that peace is a better answer than words that fall on deaf ears. And when they realize that the silence isn't anger but acceptance, it hits harder. Because acceptance means you've let go. And nothing scares an avoidant more than realizing they've been released. In the beginning, they might convince themselves that your silence means you're overreacting. They'll tell themselves you'll come back, like always. But days will pass, weeks will follow, and that silence will start to feel heavier. They'll start checking your last scene, looking at your posts, searching for your presence in places you're no longer showing up. Because your energy used to orbit them, and now it's gone, replaced by a void they can't fill. And that absence becomes the mirror that shows them their own emotional emptiness. It's in that mirror they start to see the truth that your messages weren't just texts, they were lifelines, reminders that someone cared enough to see through their walls. And when those lifelines disappear, they begin to feel what they've been avoiding all along, the ache of missing someone who no longer tries to stay close. Silence isn't revenge, it's closure. It's the moment your heart finally realizes it doesn't have to chase peace, it can create it. And in that creation, you become untouchable. Your energy no longer dances around their availability. It moves to its own rhythm, free, grounded, whole. And that freedom is what they'll feel most. Not your words, not your love, but your absence, your calm, your stillness. Because when an avoidant finally feels your silence, they don't just miss you. They realize what they lost, not just a person, but a presence. Not just attention, but emotional safety. And that realization will echo in their mind long after you've stopped waiting for a reply. Because silence is not empty. It's full of everything they were too afraid to face. And now, that silence has become your greatest power. Short, calm messages trigger reflection, not defense. Because words can either open a heart or build a wall. And when you've loved someone with an avoidant pattern, you learn that intensity scares them. Too much emotion feels like danger, and too many words sound like pressure. They don't respond to force, they respond to energy. So when your messages are calm, grounded, and steady, you stop feeding their fear, and instead, you stir their curiosity. Your tone becomes your power, your restraint becomes your magnetism, and that composure becomes the thing they can't stop thinking about, because it's not what they expect from you. They expect reactions, over-explanations, wing chasing. But when you stop doing that and start communicating with quiet control, it disarms them completely. It makes them feel safe without realizing why. When you text them with peace instead of panic, you shift the dynamic from emotional dependence to emotional leadership. You stop mirroring their distance with desperation, and you start reflecting confidence, a simple, "Hope you're doing okay," without expectation, or "I was thinking of you, no need to reply," carries more weight than 100 emotional paragraphs, because it shows maturity, it shows detachment, it shows that your world doesn't revolve around them, and that calmness unsettles them in the most powerful way. Because avoidants run from intensity, but they're drawn to balance, and when your tone is neutral yet kind, it signals that you're not chasing anymore, but you're also not angry. You've accepted what is, and that emotional neutrality triggers something deep inside them. A memory of your steadiness, the safety you once offered, the peace they didn't know how to hold. Avoidants associate love with control. So when your words stop trying to persuade or prove anything, when your messages sound like freedom, not need, they start missing the old safety they used to feel in your presence. But now, it's mixed with mystery, because you're not emotionally available in the same way anymore. You've learned to speak without seeking, to express without expecting. And that's something they can't ignore, because people remember how you made them feel, and your calmness makes them feel something unfamiliar. Peace without pressure, warmth without demand, kindness without attachment. And that's the exact combination that bypasses their defenses. It enters their mind quietly, making them question, why are they so calm? Why aren't they reacting? Have they moved on? And those questions become the beginning of their reflection. You see, calm communication confuses avoidance because it breaks their emotional pattern. They're used to distance creating control. They withdraw to feel safe. And you chase to keep the bond alive. But when you stop chasing and start responding with serenity, the balance of power shifts entirely. They lose their emotional leverage because your stillness no longer fuels their avoidance. Instead, it reflects it back to them. Your calmness becomes their mirror, showing them how disconnected they truly are. And for the first time, they're forced to face themselves without distraction. They start realizing that you're not emotionally volatile. You're self-assured, you're grounded, and that realization makes them rethink every assumption they made about you. Because your peace feels like distance, but it's actually strength. And strength is the one thing they secretly admire and fear the most. When you send a message that's steady, that doesn't demand a response, it leaves space for reflection, Because there's no emotional chase to resist, they can't push back against what doesn't push. They can't defend against what doesn't accuse. Your calm tone leaves them with themselves, and that stillness begins to do the work for you. It seeps into their thoughts when they least expect it. They'll reread your text, not because of what you said, but because of how it made them feel. It felt safe, non-judgmental, controlled, and that contrast makes them think about the chaos they've created. It makes them wonder if they misjudged your depth, if they underestimated your strength, and it reminds them of what they lost, someone who could love deeply but still stay grounded. Your calm words are like soft echoes in their mind, gentle but unshakable. They don't provoke emotion, they provoke awareness. Because calmness carries self-respect, and self-respect always creates reflection. It says, I'm not waiting for you to change, but I also won't lower my energy to match your fear. It says, I care, but I won't chase. And those words, even in their simplicity, land heavier than emotional paragraphs because they come from clarity, and clarity is rare. Avoidants are drawn to mystery, but they're changed by calmness because calmness is something they don't have inside them. It's something they crave but can't create. And when you embody it, they feel pulled toward you, not because you're begging, but because you've become a source of peace. And peace feels magnetic to someone whose entire identity has been built on running from emotional chaos. Calm communication doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you've learned emotional discipline. You've learned that your words have power. And power isn't about saying more, it's about saying less with purpose. It's about letting silence do the heavy lifting. It's about sending messages that don't scream, notice me, but quietly say, I'm at peace with myself, and that energy travels. It touches them even through a screen, because emotional control is felt, not spoken. And when you master that, you stop being the one who needs reassurance and start being the one who gives it. And that shift is everything. It's what makes them stop running, stop hiding, and start remembering. Because calm communication is the antidote to avoidance. It reaches where intensity never could. It makes them miss not just your words, but your essence, the quiet strength that once loved them, the peace they didn't know how to keep, and the calm they can't find anywhere else. Emotional neutrality makes them question their importance, because when you stop reacting, you stop feeding their ego. And when you stop feeding their ego, they start starving for the attention they once took for granted. Avoidants live off emotional reactions. They measure their importance by how much they can affect you. And when your tone softens, when your messages are calm and unbothered, when you no longer sound like someone who's trying to be understood, they start to panic quietly because the silence between your words speaks louder than anything you've ever said. Your emotional neutrality doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you've stopped depending. It means you've taken your power back. And that power is something they feel instantly, even if they never acknowledge it. Because energy doesn't need to be explained, it's felt. And your shift in energy becomes the one thing they can't control. Avoidants are addicted to control. They thrive on emotional imbalance. They pull away to see if you'll chase. They create distance to test your loyalty. They withdraw love to see if you'll beg for it. But when you stop reacting to that pattern, when you meet their emotional absence with calm acceptance instead of panic, the entire game collapses. They don't know what to do when the person they trained to overreact suddenly stops playing, because now their silence doesn't provoke guilt in you. It just reflects their own emptiness. You've stopped trying to prove your worth to someone who can't even face their own emotions. And that terrifies them, because your emotional neutrality tells them something they can't handle. That you've detached, not out of bitterness, but clarity. That you finally see the truth, and that you're no longer emotionally accessible in the way you once were. They start wondering if you've stopped loving them. But what they don't understand is that neutrality isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of self-control. It's the result of someone who's been drained and finally decided to protect their energy. It's love without attachment, care without chaos, presence without pain. And that's what confuses them. Because they're used to extremes either being idolized or hated. They don't know how to exist in your calm middle ground. Your composure makes them uneasy. It makes them wonder what's changed, what you've realized, and most of all, it makes them question their own value. Because when your emotions used to dance around them and now they don't, they start asking themselves, am I not special anymore? Did I lose my place in their heart? And those questions begin to eat at them, because for the first time, they can't find reassurance through your reaction. Your emotional neutrality becomes the mirror that forces them to see their own avoidance. Because your lack of reaction highlights their lack of effort, it exposes the imbalance they built between you, and now, without your emotional investment to lean on, they start feeling the emptiness they've been hiding from. Your calm detachment doesn't scream anger, it whispers truth. It shows that you've seen behind their patterns, you've understood their defenses, and you've stopped trying to change them. And that understanding hurts more than rejection, because rejection is emotional, but neutrality is final. It doesn't argue, it doesn't defend, it just exists in peace. And that peace is unsettling because it says, you no longer have access to my emotions. And that's the one thing they can't stand. Losing emotional access means losing control, and control is how they feel safe. They'll try to re-engage subtly. They'll say something vague to test your response. They'll check if your tone still holds warmth. But when your replies are consistent, measured, kind, but detached, they'll feel the difference. Your energy won't chase, it won't lean in. It will just exist balanced and calm. And that calmness will make them feel replaced, even if you've replaced them with peace. Because avoidance feeds off reaction. It craves validation that you still care, and your neutrality denies them that fuel. And when that happens, they begin to spiral internally. They start replaying your last messages, reading between the lines, overanalyzing your words, wondering if you've moved on. And the irony is that your lack of emotion now becomes the very thing that triggers theirs. Because when you were emotional, they shut down, but when you're peaceful, they break open. Emotional neutrality doesn't mean you've become numb. It means you've become wise. It means you've finally realized that no amount of emotional expression can change someone who's not ready to receive it. It's the maturity that comes after pain, the strength that comes after surrender. It's not coldness, it's control. It's knowing when to engage and when to step back, when to speak and when to let silence teach. And that restraint is powerful, because avoidants don't know how to handle someone who doesn't need them to react. You've taken away their emotional leverage, and now they're left alone with their own discomfort, their own regret, their own realization that maybe the love they kept running from was the love that was teaching them what safety actually feels like. You see, neutrality isn't the end of love. It's the evolution of it. It's the point where love stops being a performance and becomes an energy of self-respect. It's where you no longer need to be understood to find peace. And that's the version of you they'll never forget, because it's the version that doesn't need them anymore. The version that doesn't fight for attention. The version that simply lives, free and composed. And that image will replay in their mind long after the messages stop. They'll remember the calm in your tone, the balance in your words, the softness without weakness. And they'll miss it, not because you were emotional, but because you were steady. And steadiness is something their world doesn't have. Your neutrality becomes their lesson, their mirror, their quiet consequence, because nothing makes someone question their worth more deeply than realizing they're no longer the center of your emotional world, not because you stopped feeling, but because you finally learned how to feel without needing their validation. Kindness without attachment creates curiosity, because real power isn't in trying to make someone feel something for you. It's in showing them what love looks like when it's free of expectation. When you send a message that is kind but not needy, gentle but not pleading, you confuse their patterns. Because they're used to love coming with demands, they're used to people trying to pull them closer, explain more, prove their worth. But when your tone is kind and still detached, it feels unfamiliar. It feels safe. And safety is something an avoidant both craves and fears at the same time. Your words become soft mirrors of self-assurance, not bait for validation. And that shift changes everything. It makes them wonder why your energy feels so light, why your tone feels so confident, why your care feels so calm, and that curiosity turns into awareness. Because for the first time, they're drawn to you without feeling trapped. When you speak from detachment, you're not trying to change their mind. You're simply showing your truth without emotional debt. It's a kind of calm communication that says, I care, but I'm not waiting. It says, I respect your space, but I'm not begging to exist in it. And that energy disarms them completely. Avoidants are used to emotional intensity. They brace for it. They expect the wave of frustration, the over-explaining, the guilt. But when instead they receive calm compassion, they freeze because they don't know how to defend against peace. Peace feels foreign, peace feels powerful, and peace makes them think. Your kindness begins to echo inside them long after the message is read because it doesn't trigger their fear response. It speaks to the part of them that still believes in love, and that quiet part starts to miss you, not because you push them, but because you release them with grace. When you send something short and genuine like, I hope you're doing well, or wishing you peace today, you're not seeking validation, you're showing emotional maturity, and that tone hits deeper than any emotional plea, because it's rooted in strength, not weakness. It tells them you're not chasing, you're not clinging, you're simply being. And that being energy is magnetic. It shows that you're capable of loving someone while standing on your own. And that balance is exactly what avoidants can't master. They don't know how to love without losing themselves. But your calm kindness models what that looks like. It's love that doesn't demand. It's care that doesn't trap. It's softness that doesn't sacrifice dignity. And that energy begins to pull them in slowly because they start to wonder how you found peace in a connection they thought was broken. Kindness with detachment confuses their ego because it shows no resentment, no need for reaction. It gives them space but leaves a mark. They replay the tone of your message, the steadiness in your words, the warmth without expectation. And they realize that the energy feels different now. It doesn't drain them. It doesn't overwhelm them. It soothes them. And that's the point when curiosity begins to grow. They start thinking about you when they didn't plan to. Not because you're fighting for attention, but because your peace feels like something they lost. You've stopped competing for love, and you've started embodying it. And that quiet confidence becomes unforgettable. It's what makes them check their phone twice after reading your message. It's what makes them wonder what you're doing, be who you're becoming, and if someone else now feels the peace they once ran from. Avoidants often equate kindness with weakness, but when they meet kindness that comes with boundaries, it challenges everything they believe about control. Your detachment shows them that kindness doesn't mean access. It means grace, it means strength, it means you've reached a place where you can love someone without losing yourself in the process. And that energy is powerful because it's rare. Most people communicate from fear, fear of loss, fear of rejection, or fear of being forgotten. But you communicate from fullness, from calm, from truth. And that difference vibrates at a frequency they can't ignore. It makes them question why you're not chasing anymore, why your words feel lighter, why your love feels freer. And in that questioning, they start to reflect. They start to feel the absence of what used to be chaos, replaced now with quiet understanding. And that contrast lingers like perfume, subtle, haunting, unforgettable. You're no longer trying to pull emotion from them. You're allowing them to feel it on their own. And that's what makes this approach so powerful. Because when love stops being demanded, it starts being desired. And avoidants begin to realize they miss the very thing they thought they didn't need. Your presence, your energy, your balance. Kindness with detachment doesn't say, come back. It says, I'm fine if you don't. And that kind of confidence makes them want to come back, not to control you, but to feel the warmth they now associate with you. Because your peace becomes the safest energy they've ever known. And that safety becomes addictive. They won't tell you, but they'll feel it. They'll think about it when they're alone. And they'll realize that you no longer need their attention, but they suddenly need your calm. Kindness with detachment is the purest form of emotional intelligence. It's love without fear. It's expression without dependence. It's care without control. And that's what makes it unforgettable. It's the way your words sound like freedom. It's the way your energy doesn't demand. It just radiates. It's the way you no longer text to be seen. You text to speak truth, and that truth stays with them. Long after the screen goes dark, Because your kindness now represents peace. And peace is something they've spent their entire life running from. But now they can't stop thinking about it because you become the reminder of what genuine love feels like. Soft, patient, boundaried, and free. And that's what makes them miss you. Not your chase, not your effort, not your words, but your energy, the calm that wrapped around their chaos, the warmth that never begged to be returned, and the love that stayed beautiful, even as it learned to let go.